Hey everybody, we're back live. Took last week off, right?
Well, we were here.
We were here. We just weren't live.
Yeah.
So for our Facebook folks, we're back live this week. Hope you enjoy the show. Should be a good one. Here's the intro music.
The only show dedicated to your elder care concerns and your resource for learning about how to manage your health, housing, financial, and legal needs. This is a live call-in program featuring John Ross and Lisa Schulmeyer, elder law attorneys and senior advocates for the Art Latex. Aging Insight is dedicated to helping you navigate the challenges and blessing of growing older. So call in and ask your questions. The number is 903-793-1071. Now here are your hosts, John Ross and Lisa Schulmeyer.
Welcome to Aging Inside, everybody. This is your host, John Ross, here live in the studio. We're back on this February the 2nd, 2019.
Yeah.
I think we ought to start saying it, just, because occasionally we miss an episode. We replay them.
Yeah, we do.
But we're just our voices are just so positive and uplifting that people probably think we're live even when it's recorded.
Well, maybe they remember they heard that episode before when we do a replay because we're out, or maybe they don't.
Maybe they
I
don't.
know.
But I just said the date. That way everybody knows today. If you're listening,
you're listening today on February 2nd, you know it's live.
Then you know it's live.
Now,
That's right.
if it's July, yeah, it's a recording.
That's right. That's right. So we're live on the radio on this Super Bowl weekend.
Super Bowl weekend. I am representing my Super Bowl team. So if you are on Facebook Live, you can see me representing with my T-shirt. The Super Bowl team I am representing, John, is the New Orleans Saints.
Yes.
Who are not actually playing the Super Bowl this weekend. But we could do a whole.
But they dang sure should have been.
That's right. Yeah, I got lots to say. All of my Saints family, the Who Dat Nation, we are all devastated. But what can you do? So although for folks who may not realize it, the New Orleans Saints fans down in New Orleans, they are having a boycott bowl music festival down in New Orleans. So nobody, and all the restaurants and bars are going to be replaying the 2010 Super Bowl instead, which is the one the Saints were actually in and won. And they're not going to be playing the current one. So, these fans, they kind of take it to the limit, but, Super Bowl weekend. I mean, Tom Brady's in it again.
Yeah, boring.
Yeah, it would have been great if it would have been Tom Brady and Drew Brees, a couple of 40-somethings, because, hey, this is Aging Insight Radio. And, we talk about that you can age on your own terms, do your own thing. If, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, they are ancient quarterbacks.
That's right. Well, and being 40 in the NFL is kind of like being 40 in dog years.
Right. It's just unbelievable. So, but anyway, we probably ought to get off that before I turn the whole show into sports talk radio.
That's right. Well, again, we are live, and so if you'd like to see Lisa's Saints shirt, you can get on the Ross and Schulmeyer Facebook page. Check us out live there.
Yeah, maybe if Drew, if you're watching, give me a shout out. That would just make my day.
That would be awesome. I should have tagged Drew Brees.
Should have tagged you. Yeah, I mean, even Sean Payton. I've been happy. Thomas Morstead.
Anybody.
I can go on.
Yeah, well, that's you could actually go on.
But the other thing today is Groundhog Day.
It is Groundhog Day.
And I remember as a kid, I just loved the idea of Groundhog Day. That we look to a rodent. I mean, what is a groundhog?
I think it's a rodent.
Is it a rodent?
I don't know.
Is it a marsupial?
It's not a marsupial. I'm pretty sure it's not a marsupial.
I don't know. But anyway, today is Groundhog Day, and checking the news feeds this morning, it appears that the groundhog did not see a shadow, and so
that means spring's coming early.
Spring's coming early. Okay, whatever. But it's kind of fun
I guess.
So February, here we are, a couple of weeks till Valentine's Day, shortest month of the year. And of course, John, you were out this morning in Texarkana at the parade.
The Black History Month parade here in Texarkana. Rolled down through the streets of Texarkana, and I went out there and checked that out. Threw out my support and got me a few goodies that got tossed out.
Did they throw some candy?
They threw some candy.
Any beads? Any beads?
There actually was some beads being thrown out.
Oh,
it is Mardi Gras season, and I got a cup from the Liberty Ilu band.
Oh, awesome!
So another cup to add to the drawer of cups.
That's great. So Black History Month parade went through downtown Texarkana this morning, and it kind of got us thinking about some issues that we see in every family, no matter the color of their skin, but we do see some issues that seem to pop up a little more frequently in African American families.
Mm-hmm.
And so, John, I mean, what better way to mark Black History Month than to talk about some special estate planning issues that we see with African American families? But if you yourself are not part of an African American family, don't turn us off, because
a lot of this same stuff, it's universal.
It is universal.
But part of this, that what kind of brought it to a head was as I was thinking about doing this topic, and I was doing a little research. A lot of the things that Lisa and I deal with, becoming disabled prior to death, passing assets at death, protecting children beyond death, these things are universally applicable. But they can certainly be more important to some people than others, right? I often talk about people's have a tendency to plan for what they hope happens.
Right.
They hope they stay healthy their whole lives. They hope that they pass away in their sleep. They hope that they leave behind all of their stuff to
benefit their family,
that all get along wonderfully, and who, as beneficiaries, are all perfectly healthy, happy, well-married, living, debt-free individuals. Good luck with that.
Yeah. So sadly, nobody gets that happily ever after. Typically, nobody.
And so, when you start talking about issues like disability, and you start talking about the costs of the transition at death, and some of those issues, if you're more prone to having those sort of things, then that could be a problem. You take the African American community, for example, and they are at a significantly higher risk of becoming disabled prior to death. They're at a significantly higher risk of having an extended long-term care need over and above other members of the community. And so when you start talking about disability, when you start talking about
paying for long-term
care, as a group, they are statistically going to have higher expenses for a longer period of time. And that's a big deal. Now, combine that with, when you're paying for long-term care insurance, you can pay cash if you can afford it, but nobody can afford it.
Are you talking about long-term care?
I'm just talking about long-term care,
okay.
Right? If you're paying $6,000 at a nursing home every month, nobody can afford that.
Right. Yes.
Right. So you've only got two ways you can pay for that. You can have long-term care insurance, or you can qualify for government assistance. So that kind of made me think, well, I ought to look at the long-term care insurance industry and see what they've got going on. So what do they call them? Non-Hispanic white people.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
On average, in the 65 and older range, about 13% of them have long-term care insurance.
Oh, well, that's actually higher than I would have thought.
I was surprised by that too.
Yeah.
13% of non-Hispanic whites have long-term care insurance. 3% of Hispanics have long-term care insurance, and 2% of African Americans have long-term care insurance in that same demographic.
Wow. Yeah.
And between the non-Hispanic whites, the Hispanics, and the African Americans have the highest rate of needing long-term care services than their counterparts.
Wow. Well, yeah, you have to do research this morning, John.
As I was sitting there, luckily I had internet service while I was watching the parade.
Okay.
And I was able to do a little research. So it brings up some, here's a group with a very high risk, and yet the insurance that pays for that risk, they're the lowest purchasers of that insurance.
Well, and just anecdotally, I have not done my research, John, but my guess would be, based on what I've seen in the umpteen years of elder law practice, is that most of the folks that have long-term care insurance, that is typically purchased through an employee benefit program.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of teachers,
yep.
A lot of federal government employees, state government employees. So we see those that have long-term care insurance often purchase through their employer. There are certainly those who purchase privately through their financial advisor, insurance representative, but that's not quite as common. So I kind of wonder if that impacts the percent of African Americans who take out such policies.
Yeah, it certainly could be.
It's a research question.
Yeah, it's a research question. Well, and as far as the research goes, when you start looking at estate planning in general, so having things like at least some form of will or some form of power of attorney in place, we've often used, I've often said on the radio, about 60% of people die without any estate planning whatsoever. And that's true as a general statistic.
Yeah.
It's actually a little bit lower for the non-Hispanic white community. But in the African American community, it's a little over 70%.
Yeah.
So you also have a much higher percentage of people who die intestate, or during that period of capacity have no powers of attorney in place, and so ultimately end up having to do some sort of guardianship through the court system or things like that. And when it comes to dying intestate, I mean, we can see that just in the celebrity field.
Right. And, John, today we're kind of talking about breaking things down by racial category. But, sometimes I wonder if you go back and you just applied maybe a net worth figure or an income figure, if it wouldn't kind of break out, similarly. But, a lot of African American celebrities that we have seen that have passed away in the past year or so, it wasn't a financial issue as far as, avoiding or not doing any planning.
Right.
These celebrities had plenty of money.
That's right.
It wasn't a lack of access to advisors.
Certainly not.
Because they certainly had that. But yet, these celebrities, passed away without any planning. And, John, if we kind of want to jump on a couple of those, we've talked about a couple of them on shows before. But for instance, like Aretha Franklin, she had a special needs child.
Well, and she had a special needs child. She had an estate that now that a few things have passed, has been valued at a little over $30 million.
Right. And I'm sure, her recording of RESPCT makes up some large percent of that.
So but, not only did she have a special needs child that she made no provisions for whatsoever, and that is just unacceptable. Period. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care if you've got a very little or a whole bunch.
Yeah.
If you have a special needs member of your family that you are not providing, you're not
making
special plans for, then you are doing a huge disservice to that person who, let's be honest, can't take care of themselves. That's your job. And it's just ridiculous.
Well, and Miss Franklin, not only did she not provide But she had a diagnosis. I believe she passed from pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, so I mean, she knew she was going to die. So there's no question about it. It's coming. Of course, we all know this, right? I mean,
as far as I know, John, pretty much that's the end we all face. I could tell everyone that on the radio. I could say that with 100% certainty.
Yeah. And he's not the only, and she's not the only one. There's been several others here. We'll take a quick little break, and we'll finish out the first half of the hour by kind of pointing out some of this. Then we'll spend the rest of the show kind of pointing out some of the things that we've seen in our practice and what you can learn from them. So stick around. We'll be right back. Yeah, Aretha Franklin dying without a will, stupid. Of course, we'll mention this when we come back live on the radio. But Tupac died without a will. Now
he was. Okay, for I guess probably anyone who's watching the video might be a little more likely to be familiar with Tupac.
If you're watching Facebook Live, you know who Tupac is.
Yeah. So, but he's pretty young.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think he was relatively young, and if you start, I haven't really looked at it as an age demographic. Mm-hmm. But when they talk about the amount of people dying without a will, that's, just people dying without a will. Mm-hmm. I bet if you talked about the number of people walking around without a will, mm-hmm. and then you compared that to the age of those guys, because I bet there's 7 millennials in the country that have a will. Right. 7.
Well,
maybe 8, but probably 7.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, that's just not something that young people do. Did you do it? No, I didn't do it either. When you're young, you don't do that. Maybe some of your military people,
right?
Especially if they're going on deployment. I know that's a big issue with the command structure, is they often make them get their estate planning in order. I did actually read an interesting article for any of y'all that are watching. It was talking about the baby boomer generation, mm-hmm. who is showing to be really kind of taking care of their estate planning business.
Well, maybe
more so than the older generations have in the past.
Well, maybe they went through that with their parents, yeah. and having to deal with it.
And so what this article was talking about was, not only are these baby boomers taking care of their own business, but they've also, more than any other generation, been taking care of the business of the Gen Xers and the millennials.
Yeah.
Some of that familial welfare and familial support. But they said the interesting thing is that one thing that they really should be doing, if they're looking for a way to really benefit that grandchild or child or grandchild, is they ought to be paying for their estate planning, paying for them to do estate planning, instead of giving them money to get them out of debt for this thing or that.
Right.
And I actually have a client right now. It's a local insurance agent that I did some estate planning for, and he was very impressed with it. And so he decided that he was going to pay for all of his children to get their estate planning done. And that was basically his gift to all of them, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly thought it was cool because he had me do it. But I mean, just
get a trend going.
Yeah, make that a trend. It's awesome. All right, here we go.
Have a question? Phone 903-793-1071. Now back to Aging Insight with John and Lisa.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer. You are listening to Aging Insight.
Yes, you are.
And there's John Ross here in the studio as well. Today, we're kind of talking about some particular issues we've seen in African-American families, kind of, a nod toward Black History Month here. But it is a unique group in many ways. And while all of us can take some lessons, we thought we'd just kind of, hit some things that we've seen. And John, before the break, we were talking about, that many typical average African-American families have not done estate planning, that their percentages are lower than that of non-African-American families. But then we kind of talked about, but wait a minute, is this a trend in their community? Because, we have, celebrities like Aretha Franklin, like Prince.
Here in the last couple of years, we had Aretha Franklin died without any estate planning, $30 million estate. Prince dies without any estate planning whatsoever, and I think they estimated it between $50 and $90 million estate.
Right, and he's got all those songs and everything that are in the vault that have never even come out.
Right.
So there's a whole other issue there.
Tupac Shakur died without a will, though he was relatively young. And I don't guess I actually either I didn't remember this or I had learned it and forgotten it or something. But Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died without a will.
Yeah.
And actually that I did a little research on that this morning as well. He had an estate valued at $30,000, so a relatively modest estate, even by 1960s standards.
Right.
And yet, a multi-year interfamily fight related to control over his estate.
Yeah, and it seems like one of the items of particular interest to everyone in the family was his Bible. That he carried and he used and he studied and it just goes to show that Bible, I don't know what it cost him when he bought it, but it is that was just an item that became a flashpoint, and I am sure, John, I don't know where that item is today. No. But I'm sure that if an auction house or someone was to value it, it would be highly valued and right. Certainly exceed the total value of his estate when he was assassinated.
And certainly with all of the writings and things like that. So, here's people that have large estates, but, they're celebrities, but just within the United States, we've got 2 million businesses in the United States owned by African Americans. And somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion worth of spending power that will be passing from one generation to the next, just within the African American community. So there's a lot of money at stake here. There's a lot of businesses and therefore their employees, the assets, all of these things that when you start facing long-term care issues become an issue. Even just on the cost of it, I saw that just the lack of estate planning is costing people roughly $2 billion annually.
In nasty legal fees?
No.
Oh,
that's not even including the legal fees. That's another $1.5 billion annually in lawyer fees.
Wow. So, hey, that applies to everybody. I don't care who you are.
And that's everybody. That's right. So what do we need to do here? Well, we're going to be talking about that when we come back after the break. And maybe we can inspire you to get some of this stuff taken care of yourself. We are on Facebook Live. We're also available for phone calls. You can call the phone numbers 903-793-1071, or during the break, get on Facebook, watch the show there, and you can put your comments in the comment section. Or if nothing else, just give us a thumbs up or a like, or share it with your friends so that they can get this good information.
Yeah, that's right. So I love the second half of the show, John, because we really get to dig into some things. And so we are going to do that when we come back from the news break. So I hope you all stick around.
That's right. We'll see you in a second. All right, and we're back. Yeah, so I found all kinds of little weird statistics on this stuff, but pretty interesting stuff. I was surprised by the $1.5 billion in attorney's fees annually.
Well, that doesn't really surprise me because, if you don't have a power of attorney and you end up having to go through a guardianship process, we tell our clients all the time that that's going to cost you several $1,000s.
Right.
And that's just in our little provincial neck of the woods. And in the big picture of things, I mean, legal fees are expensive, of course.
Yeah, but if you look at how much that we make on one of those things annually in our little town of Texarkana, which is not a lot, but here we are in Texarkana. But yeah, if you start looking at all the other lawyers that do this kind of work in all the other little towns, all through all the other little states,
yeah,
it's going to add up to some big numbers.
Yeah, no, even talking to our colleagues who practice in the bigger cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, the cost of guardianships, the cost of probates is much higher in those locations.
Absolutely.
Because the courts are
much stricter.
Yeah, they're much stricter. The timing is more difficult, and so the lawyers actually charge more. And so, yeah, no, you're just throwing money away, just setting it on fire if you haven't done some estate planning or life planning documents. But yeah, when you put it to the dollar amount, John, that the frugal person inside me screams a little about that.
No, that's exactly right.
So, but yeah, it'd be interesting on Dr. King's estate. I bet it's worth more now than it was when he passed.
I bet that's right. I bet it's worth a lot more than $30,000. And they actually, what they did is that they litigated. They eventually formed a corporation to manage the estate. Mm-hmm. That corporation's still in existence. It's still managing the estate. Over the years, there have been several additional fights within the corporation over control of assets. And on top of that, the corporation itself has been in legal fights with others. You mentioned like some of the documents and stuff. There was apparently a family friend that had original drafts of some of the speeches and some of the writings, and the corporation sued them to have those returned to the estate. And of course, they said that those were lifetime gifts, and so they belong to them. And we have we've got a comment here. See if I can make that go to the screen there. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, what is the typical estate planning cost, and what's the process to begin? The cost, I will say, the cost can vary somewhat.
Yeah, it depends on how simple or complicated. I mean, the cost for really kind of getting everything in order, on this very simple side can be, $750, $800, which compare that to a cost of a probate or a guardianship down the road.
$4,000 or $5,000.
That's a very modest amount. More complicated estates, blended families, conflicts between family members that we need to plan for.
Issues and things like that.
Yeah.
That can get up into the thousands. But in almost every situation, the amount spent is going to pale in comparison
to what would be spent
to what would be spent. And so yeah, it's essentially an investment that it will save money, even if you don't necessarily see it on the front end.
In estate planning, to me, John, when I pay for car insurance, I hope that I never need to use it. Unfortunately, with estate planning, things like powers of attorney and wills, you will use it at some point. So, it is investment, but you're going to benefit from it. So,
yeah, no, that's right. So it is good stuff. That's a good question.
And getting started, I know at our office, typically it's just make an appointment, come in, and let's visit. We don't have you bring in a bunch of homework or anything like that. Just kind of get started, see what the lay of the land looks like.
Yeah, no, that's right. All right, here we are going back live. Welcome back to Aging Insight, everybody. This is your host, John Ross, here live in the studio with my faithful co-host, Lisa Schulmeyer.
Who's having problems with the microphone.
Can't get her microphone to work. Yeah. We are live. We're live both on Facebook and here on the radio, so you can tune in and check us out. If you're on Facebook, you can put your questions, comments in the comments section. We had one while we were on the radio break that we got to answer. And of course, if you want to phone one in, it's 903-793-1071. And we'll take that call. Now, today we're talking about some estate planning, some asset protection issues that are kind of, at least we see, particular to the African American community. And I'll say one thing that was very surprising to me when I first started out. Early on, I had a lady come in, and she was in her, I would say, I think she was in her early 90s. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she had called the office, and she said she wanted to put her property in her, she wanted to give her house and her property to her son, her grandson. It was a grandson, I believe. Uh-huh. And so I told her to come on in and bring a copy of the deed. And that way we could go over it and talk about what her options are. And really, I was walking into the meeting thinking I'm probably going to try to talk her out of giving away her house.
Right. Yeah. You know, we normally do try to talk folks out of giving away their house.
There's better ways, ladybird deeds and things like that are better ways, trusts, there are different ways that you can transfer assets without giving it away. But that's what I thought was going to end up being the conversation. What turned out to be the conversation was, as I sat there with her and I said, well, did you bring me the deed? And she said, yes, but she said, the deed's not in my name.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, whose name is it? And it was actually in her grandfather's name.
Yeah. So this lady is 90 and this deed is in her grandfather's name.
Right. And of course she's, grandfather had died, as I had learned from them. Grandfather and grandmother had passed. They had about, I think they had 8 or 9 kids, as right. You did in the 1800s.
Yeah, you got to work the farm.
That's right. But one of those kids had remained on the farm, had maintained the farm, had raised their kids,
including this lady you were talking to.
Including this lady.
Now, did she have some siblings as well?
She did also have 6 or 7 siblings, again, as you did at the turn of the century. And as those kids grew up and moved off, this lady stayed in the home as well. And since her parents had passed, she has been residing in this property.
She's been residing there, paying the taxes, maintaining it, keeping it up.
And so from her standpoint, this was hers.
Except for really, John, under the law, it might have been 1/16 hers, maybe.
No, and in fact, it may be. And it was really, as we kind of got into it, and I started looking at it. My best guess is that there was 50, 60, possibly 70 different owners of this property, any of which could have a potential claim to it. Right. Now, she would have lots of claims for the upkeep, the maintenance, the property taxes, even the fact that she's just exclusively occupied it. There are types of claims called adverse possession. People will hear this where, oh, well, I heard if I live there for so many years
and I pay the taxes,
then it's mine. Well, it's not that easy though.
Yeah, no, it's not because the whole point of that is adverse possession. Well, if all your cousins know you live there and they don't care that you live there, then you're not possessing the property adversely to them. They've kind of implied their consent. But the moment you want to put that property completely in your name, I guarantee some cousin or two is going to come out of the woodwork and say, oh, wait, I want to be paid for my share.
Yeah, and this was really, and again, this was very early on, and I'm not from East Texas, I'm from South Texas, and this was and of course I'd gone to law school, I had taken property class, but I started hearing this term of heir property.
Yes, the heir property term.
This was not in law school.
Yeah, this is not a term of art. It is not a legal term, but it is a term that is frequently used, particularly among African American families when they are talking about property that an ancestor had purchased and that they know is in the family, so to speak. And you'll ask them about, well, do you have any real estate? And they'll say, oh, well, I have my home here in town, but I also have some air property down near Jefferson, Texas.
Right.
And they use the term air property as if it were a term of art, any professional term, because that's how they've always heard it.
Right.
And so they know that they have an interest in their ancestors' property, but oftentimes, John, like you experienced with this 90-year-old lady, they have not taken the legal steps through several generations to have a clear title to that property.
Yeah, and this can wreak some havoc in a couple of regards. The first one is in the long-term care context. If you're trying to qualify for a benefit like Medicaid to help pay for that nursing home care, Medicaid is going to be looking at your assets and the value of those assets. And they're going to use the value of those assets to determine whether or not the state is going to pay for you or whether you should just pay for yourself. And that's real easy to think of. If I've got $10,000 in cash and the state says, well, you can only have $2,000, well, then I need to spend $8,000.
Right. But if you have an ownership interest, a fractional ownership interest in some real estate, how much is that worth? And if it, John, if there's a $100,000 piece of property that the family is referring to as heir property, and you have a 1/10 interest in that property, well, you now have a $10,000 asset tied up in some dirt and trees somewhere.
That's right. And it's not something that you can easily sell. In fact, it's probably impossible to sell your undivided 1/10
Yeah, I do
interest.
not want your 1/10 interest with all of your cousins in your heir property.
So yeah, it's probably impossible to sell, at least on the open market. And yet, the state of Texas or the Department of Human Services, regardless of where it's at, is going to look at that as a piece of property that has value. That value is likely going to exceed the amount of assets you can have in order to qualify for the government assistance, and they're going to not pay for you. So now you're in a real pickle. Think about this. You have no cash to pay for your care. You have no way to care for yourself. And you cannot qualify for the benefits that are there to pay for people in your situation.
Yeah, because of some acreage of property that your great-grandfather owned back in the day.
That's right. Now, there can be some solutions to this in a crisis. I mean, it's one of the things that we do is try to find solutions to crises.
Yeah, we've made some claims for hardship waivers that it would be impossible to sell the property.
And we have had family members where, while me as an independent third party, I'm not going to buy into your family's undivided ownership, but another family member might.
Yeah.
So sometimes we've had brothers or sisters buy their brother or sister's interest in that heir property, but then that cash has to get spent down.
Right.
So on the one hand, you've got this whole long-term care issue. The other context, and we'll take a break here in just a second, and we can talk about this more, but like with this lady that we started this whole conversation with, she wants to transition her home, which is not her home,
right,
to this grandson, but it's not hers to transfer. And of course, her next question is, well, then how do I get it into my name?
Right.
Right. We'll talk about that here in just a second when we come back. Stick around.
The heir property. John, I will say in East Texas, one of the counties that has the most messed up heir property situation is Marion County.
Yeah.
Little Marion County, home of Jefferson, Texas. And it's messed up down there for a couple of reasons. One, Jefferson used to be a huge, big port town. Mm-hmm. And so there was some wealthy merchants and all, some Yankees some white Yankees from up north had come down to Jefferson, Texas, and set up shop and shipping interest. And John, one day that just went away.
That's right.
Because the river dried up and they couldn't ship anything any longer. A lot of those Yankee families deeded property to local workers and
just to get out from under it,
just to leave. And so a lot of that property ended up in the hands of African American families that were from the Marion County area.
Yeah, many of them were working in that shipping industry, working on the docks, or maintaining the
homes,
the lands that these folks held.
Yeah. So, but then one generation passes to the next generation, to the next generation, and very few folks did any kind of legal paperwork past the initial transfer from the shipping families that left town. And so here we are in 2018, 2019, and I get this coming up all the time. Even the people in the business, like landmen who go and research title to property, when you say the property is in Marion County, they just kind of roll their eyes and groan because it's such a mess. And so for families to try to untangle that, it's a mess. It usually there's an expense to untangle it all. And it's just a tough deal.
Yeah, it's a mess. And really it eventually the property becomes worthless.
Right. And I've had some people come in where they have been sued trying to quiet the title in a piece of property. And them and their 60 cousins all got served with papers to try to, because somebody's trying to settle the title, and it's just a mess.
Yeah, so it's really, really a pain in the rear.
So heir property is not a legal term, but it is a shorthand term for what people refer to as family property that maybe they're not really sure exactly how much they have.
Yes, inherited undivided interests.
Yes.
All right, we're coming back in 5 seconds.
Have a question? Phone 903-793-1071. Now back to Aging Insight with John and Lisa.
Well, welcome back, everyone. It is now our final segment on today's Aging Insight, and we've kind of jumped off the springboard here into some issues that we've seen, particularly with African American families in our area. And we've been talking about the term heir property and the fact that it seems more prevalent in the African American family, but certainly not exclusive.
That's right.
There are plenty of all races families have not taken care of the legal chain of title on family real estate. But it does seem to be more prevalent in the African American community. And so, John, we talked about how an ownership interest that is undetermined and undivided in, quote, heir property can impact your eligibility for Medicaid and for care programs. So what else is the problem there?
Well, and the other problem is kind of in the scenario that I was describing on the radio. You've got this 90-year-old woman who inherited this property from her parents, who inherited it from their parents, but so did dozens and dozens of other people. It's just that she's been in charge of it. Well, now she wants to transfer it to somebody else. But really, in order for her to do that with any real legal efficacy,
for it to
work,
yes,
she's got to have clear title, which means she needs to get it entirely into her name. The problem is that involves a lengthy court process trying to determine who all of these heirs are, then contacting all of those heirs. On top of all of that, in these situations, the court appoints additional attorneys to represent unknown heirs.
Yeah, because maybe you didn't figure out who all the cousins were.
That's right. And so it's not uncommon for a suit to quiet title, which is generally what that's going to be referred to to cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I remember a case down in Cass County, John, the Atlanta, Linden area, and a suit to quiet title had been going on some property down there for multiple years. And I think they had identified 148 potential heirs based on tracing the family line. They had to give notice to all of those folks. So that's, running down mailing addresses. They had an attorney for any unknown heirs or people they weren't able to contact. And I just remember that case was a big mess. And, it's a judge ultimately is going to decide whether all the processes have been done properly, and to give good title to whomever is seeking it. But John, the issue there on trying to quiet title, like with your lady, if she has the recollection
right
of who all everybody was in the family, she could reach out and ask them to quit claim their interest in the property to her.
Sure.
And John, in having that conversation is ultimately, some folks will do it. They didn't know they had an interest. They don't care about it. They live in California,
There's
wherever.
always some that won't.
But there is always someone that thinks their 1/28th interest in a piece of raw land in East Texas must be worth $1 million, and they will not sign to quit claim the property, and they won't even accept a reasonable purchase price offer,
right? Because
they're just convinced that maybe there's oil on that property or something, and so if they give it up, they're giving up something. In all of my years of practice, John, I have never been in that position to where I knew something big was coming onto that property. And so you end up in a family conflict, and, nothing like the family grapevine when one cousin's calling some other cousin, and it's a big mess.
And so, like in this case, this house and this land, it had value. The problem is the house and land's value was only as good as the title. The title was terrible. To fix the title, frankly, was going to cost about as much as the house and the land was worth in the first place. And so once you net all of that out, the lack of planning, the lack of taking care of the business of transitioning the property appropriately over those years has taken an asset that clearly has value and made it worthless.
Right. And the sooner they would have addressed that asset, when granddad died, if the next generation had taken care of it, we wouldn't be sitting 2 generations later with a bigger mess than it was before.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, would it have cost them a little money? Would it have taken a little time at the death of the grandparents, even possibly at the death of the parents, to do this? Sure, but it would have saved this piece of property, because this piece of property is essentially worthless. Now, ultimately, I ended up telling her, hey, look, you keep paying the property taxes, and maybe your grandson, you die, he can step in, he can keep paying the property taxes. Some point, somebody's going to have to pay to fix all of this. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be a nightmare, and it may be worth more to just let it go.
Well, you could probably try some other things. You could, put posted signs all around the property and basically try to start establishing a claim of adverse possession as to any other family members.
Yeah, very possible.
That's a possibility. But, there's no guarantees with any of that. And regardless, you still have to go to court and give notice and serve all the family members to say, hey, I've got adverse possession of this property and it's now mine. So you're still in that process.
Yeah, and now we're back to that $1.5 billion each year in legal fees due to lack of planning and what that costs in the transition of assets from one generation to another. We've got a couple of minutes, about 5 minutes left on the show, and so wanted to hit one or maybe two others depending on our time. But the other thing that I see a lot more in the African American community is multi-generational families in one household.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You've got grandmother, possibly one or more children, then possibly one or more grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren, yes, all within the same household. And sometimes who's doing the caregiving in all of this, you got great-grandmother taking care of great-grandchild. You got great-grandchild taking care of great-grandmother.
Right.
You've got a lot of this, and there's a number of impacts through all of this when you've got multi-generational situations all within the same household, because while it's all seems to maybe be working right at the moment,
mm-hmm,
let somebody die and see how well it keeps working.
Right. Yeah.
When, for example, I've just in the last little while, I've had situations where the owner of the home, who is providing that house to several people, so it's a multi-generational household, but now the actual owner of the house has passed, although they had always said,
yes, I was going to bring that up. They always said.
Yeah, they always said they were going to leave the house to the daughter that lives there at the house so she could keep maintaining the house. It didn't happen. And as a result, the house ends up passing to 3 or 4 different people.
Because what you say means nothing.
That's exactly right.
It must be written down.
And so now we've got this situation where there's people that are not members of this multi-generational household.
But members of the family.
But they now have ownership interests.
Right.
And, inevitably, they're looking at it from a financial standpoint. They're saying, wait a second now, why should you get to live there for free?
Yeah, you should be paying me some rent.
Yeah, you should be paying me some rent, or we should be selling this place
so I can get my part.
Yeah, so I can get my third of it out. And often, and particularly when you've got that, grandmother, especially when the grandmother's caring for that grandchild or great-grandchild, being able to make provisions for those minor children, making sure there's somebody in place to manage the assets, making sure they have a place to live, making sure they have a designated guardian. All of those sort of issues become critically important.
Yeah. It's very frequent in families that I visit with that they'll come in and say, well, grandma said this, and it just doesn't carry any legal weight whatsoever. And it's very frustrating to those that are left behind, that the fact that everybody in the family, John, I even had one time where grandma announced something like that at a family reunion.
Yeah, of course.
and I got to tell them in our office that really didn't mean anything.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how many witnesses you have.
Right.
That grandma said you're getting the house. It just doesn't matter. That's not happening.
So, no matter the color of your skin, take care of your business.
That's right.
But so appreciate you all staying with us today and listening to some special issues that we see, particularly that are more prevalent in the African American community, but could certainly apply to anyone.
That's right. And we hope you all have a enjoyable week coming up, and hope you're out there celebrating Black History Month in whatever way, shape, or form you enjoy. It's lots of good stuff going on this month, so check it out. Otherwise, we'll see you next weekend.
See you next week.
And we'll see y'all later too.